Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Ibn Battuta Part 3, The Mad Sultan by Extra History. Last time we saw how Ibn Battuta explored further Eastern Africa, the Ilkhanate, Anatolia, right, all these different places throughout the Muslim world. Today we'll see as he travels further and further afield, perhaps continuing to head eastwards, as he was sort of expecting to end up in India, though he seems to keep getting distracted along the way. Now, before we get into this one, I'd appreciate it if you guys would leave a like on the video, subscribe to my channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below, and it'll give you access to exclusive reaction content. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this video.
May 1332, the Caucasus.
Hmm.
Ibn Battuta and his wagon train have pitched their tents on a hill, waiting to see sight of the royal caravan they wish to join. His train full of servants, enslaved people, and concubines has been waiting a long time. Then, dust on the horizon. "We saw a vast city on the move," he wrote, "with its inhabitants, with mosques and bazaars in it. The smokes of the kitchens
A vast city on the move. Now, that's often how the Mongols in particular are described, right? These sort of nomadic societies, cities on the move, all these different people, all these different aspects of life being moved from one place to another, right? A nomadic style of life versus a more sedentary style of life.
rising in the air, for they cook while they march, and horse-drawn wagons transporting the people. He descends to meet Ozbeg Khan, ruler of the Golden Horde.
Mm. Russian shoulders with some important guys.
When Ibn Battuta crossed the Black Sea and landed in Crimea, he'd soon realized he'd crossed into another world. Though the Khanate's state religion was Islam, the more European provinces of the empire were thoroughly Christian.
Yeah, and Islam had only relatively recently become the state religion. Now, there was a certain degree of Islamicization among the population, but especially considering the fact that the Mongols had come in, conquered, and now were ruling over a bunch of different populations, you would find a variety of different peoples and religions. Like they said, in the sort of more Eastern European Russian side of things, you have a lot of Christians, Orthodox Christians in particular.
Filled with Russians and Ukrainians. And that meant red-haired people with blue eyes, who ate pork and made evil noises by ringing their church bells.
Hmm.
A sound that terrified Ibn Battuta.
Oh, yeah?
But he soon passed out of the infidel lands and entered the steppe, traveling for the first time by wagon rather than horse or camelback.
That's interesting because he's mostly been in majority Muslim areas. Some places where there was more a mix of religions, but I think that's the first time he's been in sort of a majority Christian region or area. He went to East Africa where there was a mix of Islam and non-Islamic religions. He saw Anatolia where there was a mix of Muslims and Christians and Jews, though, still under Muslim rule. Here, you saw actual sort of Orthodox Christian majority populations. Interesting.
Joining a Mongol caravan in order to find the Khan and link up with the Silk Road to India. And he found much to like about the hardy and competent Mongols, but also much that shocked him. Even the observant Muslims drank alcohol, for instance, arguing that the Quran forbade wine and wheat beer, but not millet beer or fermented mare's milk. Ah, sweet, delicious loopholes. These differences came into stark relief when he met Ozbeg Khan, entering his huge gold-tiled tent and finding the ruler sitting on a silver throne, flanked by 4 unveiled wives. In fact, he was soon to learn that the Khan consulted his wives on matters of state, in public, and that upon entering a tent, it was the Khan that stood until his wives were seated. Mongol society often treated women as near equals, and powerful women held a position higher than less powerful men.
Yeah, like I said, he's seeing how different people live their lives, practice their religion, even if they share a religion, Islam. He's seeing how they interpret it differently. I mean, he was in Anatolia last episode. He found that they practiced their religion quite differently, maybe did not observe in quite an orthodox manner as he'd seen elsewhere. Now he's seeing an even further sort of different and loose interpretation of it, right? A different culture, different ways of life.
This was very different from his native Morocco, where a leader's wives might privately wield influence, but were never seen in public. Ibn Battuta spent Ramadan with the Khan, visiting and conversing with his wives, and becoming particularly close with the youngest, Princess Bayalan, whom he shared much in common. for she too was far from home and adrift in a strange culture.
Hmm.
The daughter of the Byzantine emperor,
Huh.
given away in a political marriage. Ibn Battuta sympathized, but for different reasons. While he liked the Khan, who was a generous and able ruler, he disliked how the man drank, even showing up for afternoon prayer one day, stumbling drunk and
Uh-oh.
nearly incomprehensible.
I mean, there's different interpretations of religion. That might take it a little far, especially for a more orthodox Muslim, a more stringent believer in the faith. That's a little disrespectful.
But as a point of etiquette, after all of the gifts and hospitality the Khan had bestowed upon him, he really couldn't just drop the mic and bail on his latest patron. So instead, he asked the Khan if he could take, you guessed it, a side trip. Because Princess Bayalun was pregnant and got permission to have their baby at home in Constantinople.
Wow,
So, Ibn Battuta requested
that's quite a side trip.
to accompany her, as it was the perfect opportunity to take said side trip, not just in safety, but in style.
Right.
The request granted, Ibn Battuta set out with the princess's caravan, doubling back
Traveling with the princess to Constantinople, yeah, that is traveling in style.
to the city of the Byzantines, seeing the Hagia Sophia and meeting the emperor, marveling at the
Hey.
city's relative religious tolerance, and touring the Golden Horn. But there was a bit
Talking about majority Orthodox populations, he's now in Constantinople, the city of Orthodox Christianity. This is now, well, I can't really plot it geographically, but the sort of furthest, maybe afield culturally or religiously from where he started.
of a problem. See, on the way back home, Princess Bayalun had started throwing off the facade of Islamic conversion, and now it was clear
Ah.
that she wasn't coming home. This had been an escape
Oh.
plan, so Ibn Battuta had to turn around with the royal caravan, retrace his steps, and inform the Khan. Except now,
Yeah, we have learned he's a bit of a narc. Though, that's more than just being a narc. That's a pretty big deal. He's like, uh-oh, the princess is not going back. She wants to stay home in Constantinople. Now I have to go and find the Khan again. Oh,
was winter on the steppe, and Ibn Battuta, a Moroccan, was not used to snow.
right.
It was so cold that they traveled along frozen rivers as if they were roads. So cold that when he washed his face with hot water, it froze in his beard. So
Damn.
cold that he wore 3 fur coats and so many layers of clothing underneath that he had to be helped into the saddle. But they made it to the capital of the Khanate, and after presumably telling the Khan about his wife, because he never actually mentions the reaction, Ibn Battuta joined the trade caravan
Yeah, I imagine the reaction was not incredibly pleasant. But who knows?
toward India. And this was some of the hardest traveling of his career, through mountains and dry country, and his recollections of it are confused and non-specific. In 8 months of relentless travel, he met the Khan of Chagatai, had a daughter, and finally
What?
crossed through the Khyber Pass
Huh?
into India. They had to spread blankets in front of the camels so their feet would not sink in the deep snow. The Indian border authorities met him as he crossed into India, questioning him about his intentions and qualifications, and telling him that should he wish to work for the Sultan, he must agree never to leave India except on official business.
Whoa.
He agreed and signed a contract. Then,
That's quite the contract to sign. I will say, I do not believe he's going to hold to that word. This is a man who cannot help but travel in just about every direction. There's no shot he's going to be held down.
he took out a loan to buy the Sultan an appropriate gift of horses, gold, and enslaved people, knowing the custom was to be granted an even larger gift in return. Yeah, he hadn't gone gold digging across 3 continents
Hmm.
without learning how this stuff worked. When the party arrived, Ibn Battuta was overawed. The Sultan's wooden palace, known as the Hall of 1,000 Pillars, was one of the largest structures he'd ever seen. Could it be that the rumors of the Sultan's splendor and generosity were not an exaggeration? Well, unfortunately, it would be a while before Ibn Battuta found out, because Muhammad Tughlaq, the Sultan of Delhi, was out crushing a rebellion.
Hmm.
But in his absence, the Sultan's vizier accepted the gift and gave Ibn Battuta silk robes, a house, the tax revenue of 2 villages,
Whoa.
which is 5,000 silver dinars a year for those of you keeping score at home, plus another 2,000 dinars as a starting bonus. Ibn Battuta was floored.
Not bad. I mean, we said this in previous episodes, but his sort of expertise as a Qadi, an Islamic judge, he was doing pretty well for himself, but the further afield he goes, the more money he makes for his services, especially being such a well-traveled individual with such a resume to draw on. He's got, quite the achievements to boast of already. Like I said, quite the good resume to present.
He was already part of Delhi's landed aristocracy, and he hadn't even been given a job yet.
Nice.
Then, things got even wilder. Because the Sultan returned to Delhi in triumph, riding to the palace on a war elephant, the first in a great procession of armored beasts. And on the back of each elephant was a huge basket of treasure and a catapult. Entranced, Ibn Battuta watched his men shoveled gold and silver coins into the machines and fired the treasure out into the celebrating crowd.
Wow.
And that's when it hit Ibn Battuta. This was a dream job. Coming here was a great idea. And this was only reinforced when he met the Sultan. And Muhammad Tughlaq liked the Moroccans so much that he made Ibn Battuta the Qadi of Delhi. And at this point, even Ibn Battuta was like, thank you? But maybe that's too much. I mean, except for being a Qadi on a caravan, I never had a real job or tried a case. In fact,
He's like, I do have quite the resume. I've met a lot of important people, done some pretty cool stuff. But in terms of my job experience, it's not actually too extensive. I mean, I wouldn't turn down this sort of opportunity, but I guess our good friend Ibn Battuta here feels that maybe he should take a little step back.
your religious law here is a bit different than the type I studied. Not to mention your court language is Persian, which I don't really speak well, so maybe we just let me work my way up? Huh? The Sultan told him not to worry, assigned 2 deputies to do the real work, and doubled his salary.
Classic.
Unusual? Undoubtedly. But Ibn Battuta was about to find out that
Man, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. He's like, you're not ready to do the job? That's fine. Just assign him some assistants and pay him even more. I like the guy. This is classic sort of absolute ruler type stuff.
the Sultan of Delhi was a bit of an eccentric. An unorthodox visionary. Some referred to him as mad.
Oh.
Early in his reign, he'd experimented with issuing copper coins backed by gold, but that scheme fell apart when Chinese traders wouldn't accept them. Then, he decided to found a new capital and move his court to central India. And when the elites resisted, he used troops to force them. That too collapsed. And now, fear
Hey, you need to be a pretty powerful ruler to move all your elites to the middle of nowhere. Or not the middle of nowhere, but just away from where they are. You can look at Louis XIV, the Sun King, or Peter the Great in Russia. 2 monarchs, 2 absolute monarchs, very powerful rulers who said to their aristocrats, you know what? You're coming with me. Come on now, move. And they moved.
Fearing the entrenched power blocks of the elites that hated him. The Sultan was hiring any foreigners that showed up so that they would be personally loyal to him, which was good, at least for Ibn Battuta. He became close with the Sultan, observing as the monarch a religious scholar in his own right, invited Hindu and Jain holy men into the palace for religious debates. He even accompanied the monarch on military campaigns. At one point, the Sultan brought Ibn Battuta to see the Hindu yogis perform tricks, like climbing a levitated rope. A performance that terrified the devout young scholar. But, being a favorite,
How about that? So we've seen Ibn Battuta has seen different ways of practicing Islam throughout the Islamic world, but now he's bumped into a lot of different religions, right? He saw some of the local religions in East Africa. He's met with the Orthodox Christians, of course, Judaism throughout the Middle East, in Anatolia specifically, Buddhism, a lot of different religions he's been bumping up against now.
was a financial problem. Keeping up with the Sultan's lifestyle, the extravagant hunting trips, the constant gift-giving, and hosting officials at his house actually put Ibn Battuta into debt. So that was problem number 1. Problem number 2 was that the Sultan was a psychopath.
Oh.
Even Ibn Battuta, who
That's a problem. I will say, on the money issue, this was the thing. In a lot of countries, Middle Ages into the sort of early modern period, where you have these aristocratic officials, right? A lot of these positions throughout the government are filled essentially with landed gentry. Now, yeah, they're making a lot of money, but a lot of things are on their dime, right? They're paying for a lot of expenses, running their office, throwing lavish parties, having people over. And so, you essentially, in a lot of these positions, needed to be a very wealthy landed aristocrat because you needed to be able to pay for all the expenses that came with your position, right?
often flattered his patrons, wrote, "The Sultan was far too free in shedding blood. He used to punish small faults and great without respect of persons, whether they men of learning or piety or noble descent. Every day there are brought to the audience hall hundreds of people, chained, pinioned, and fettered, and they are executed, tortured, or beaten.
Damn.
Muhammad Tughlaq killed advisors for disagreeing with him. He tortured holy men who refused to come to the palace. Particularly, he liked dropping red-hot squares of metal on victims' chests and
Ooh.
ripping them off. And if he really hated someone, he'd throw them to his trained execution elephants, who would
Execution elephants? Come on, man.
use the swords affixed to their tusks.
Jesus. They mentioned how he'd have religious debates at his palace. I could imagine if you're sort of a Buddhist brought in to have a religious debate with the Sultan, you sort of listen and go, yeah, oh yeah, you're so right. I would not be comfortable disagreeing with this guy.
To play catch with the unfortunate victim.
Ugh.
And perhaps that's when it hit Ibn Battuta. Coming here was a terrible idea.
Yeah.
He began plotting his escape.
Wow. Well, there's been lots of promises of wealth, and initially that seemed to be the case, but he's clearly encountering some serious issues now. Looks like next time we'll get to see China. Hey, talk about far afield. That will be, I think, by far the furthest afield we've seen him go. That's a real impressive one. But before we get to that, if you guys enjoyed this one, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon, linked down below. Another exciting episode. We see a lot more of the different cultures and religions and peoples that Ibn Battuta encountered on his travels. So I hope you guys are all having a great day today, and I'll see you all again next time. Goodbye.